So I have a question. So obviously we're commanded to listen to the court, but in the case that the court becomes corrupt, which it has like in the days of the Hashmoneim, I believe it became corrupt when Hellenists took over. What's the protocol on that? Do we just go along, or do form a new one? And in the case that there is another court.
In that case, it's a mitzvah to break halachas. I don't think there's been proof of the court being corrupted. There's an instance that Herod had almost all the members of the court killed. I've never heard of the court declaring an unkosher ruling that we at least have documented. I mean, it may have happened, but I just don't know of it.
Oh, okay.
It's mentioned in the Talmud like this, right? I'm sure you guys are familiar with the story of the guy who's being tried says, well, if I'm right, let the walls cave in, let the waters flow backwards to show that God's on my side. And then the court says it doesn't matter what God says because God gave the authority to the court. And it's what we say that matters. The Torah is not in heaven. And then they quote Exodus chapter 23, that one should not follow the majority to do evil, teaching you that we have a commandment to follow the majority to do good. That's it. If the court, the majority, because the majority means the court, if they're doing something bad, God's commanding you to do the opposite. But the argument that Karaites have against the rabbis are not ethical arguments. They're arguments on ceremonial law. I've never heard a Karaite say that the rabbis are commanding you to murder and to steal. No, they'll say, oh, well, we interpret this differently, and you interpret it like that. On ceremonial issues, you're going to separate yourself from the Jewish people because of a disagreement on ceremony? Because clearly that we have more justification to believe that there was a court. The Mishnah predates Karaite Judaism. I'm not convinced that the Sadducees didn't believe in the oral law. That's a misunderstanding of what the oral law is, because the Sadducees actually sat on the Sanhedrin. There was a time that the Sadducees had their own Sanhedrin. What they were against was the traditions of the fathers, what's known as Midrash and Agadah nowadays, not of a consensus of the court. But we don't see anywhere that Sadducees win against there being a Sanhedrin or civil laws. How can you run a country without civil law, right? It doesn't make any sense. That's what halakha is civil law. Nowadays, it's all been mystified. Halakha and Torah doesn't make sense to us in Galut because we're not in Israel. But Israel was meant to be a religious agrarian society where these laws actually make sense. So how can you have a group of people within that country saying that the Supreme Court had no authority and everyone was meant to walk around adjudicating Torah law on their own? I mean, it's the stupidest notion. There's a commandment in the Torah to put people to death for breaking Shabbat. It doesn't tell you exactly how to keep Shabbat, but it does tell us to listen to this court, and in all areas of dispute, we have to go to them for Torah. And someone's going to assume that there was a group in the society that were complete anarchists who said, no, we're going to put people to death the way we see fit, and we're going to declare the new month the way we see fit. It doesn't make any sense. But anyways, the people who came up with this conclusion are the authors of the New Testament. And there's a statement in Josephus, but it doesn't say that they were against halakha or rabbinic law, but it says that they were against the traditions of the fathers. So that's exactly what traditions of the fathers are. They're midrashim and agadot. Every time you open up Rashi and it takes a pasuk from the Chumash and it does a whole 180 and it brings in characters that aren't even in it, that is taken from what's called legends and folklore. And that is what they were against. They were against creating laws based off of legend and folklore. And there's halachot that are based off, while there are also halachot that are based off verses in Tanakh. And that's really what they wanted halakha to be based on, rightly so. For example, the notion of Oneg Shabbat. Oneg Shabbat, the rabbis took it from Isaiah chapter 55, that one should rejoice in the Sabbath. There's no commandment in the Torah to rejoice in the Sabbath. There is a rabbinic one now. Now, regardless, if they took commandments from Confucius, they would still be binding, assuming they weren't unethical, because the court declared it. Even the Sadducees weren't against oral law.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. That was nice. Shimshim in the comment section asks, mystical Judaism is rooted in the teaching of fear. OCD behavior, which plagues the Jewish community, is a form of fear. Wake up, return to the scriptures, remember what the psalmist wrote about fear.
The most repeated statement by God to the Jewish people is fear not, actually. It's true, but we shouldn't be overcome with fear as long as we're, like the brother said, grounded in Torah. But that doesn't mean that as a nation that we should wander aimlessly trying to apply ceremonial law according to our own interpretation, because that just means that my children can't marry your children. You won't be able to eat in my house for Shabbat. It's complete chaos. It's easy to say that from a Christian perspective, because Christians don't keep laws. But if you try to keep ceremonial laws just by what the Torah says, you're going to realize that there has to be a consensus on how we keep these things. I mean, what do we do on Yom Kippur? I mean, what does it mean to afflict us? I mean, there has to be something for a nation to progress. This whole thing that everyone decides on their own and everyone walks around with a Bible under their arm, it doesn't make. Now, Torah scrolls, yes. There's a commandment for every Israelite to write a Torah scroll. A king have to write 2, Seperation Torah. But that doesn't mean that everyone read it and came to the same conclusion. No, there was a court, there was a ruling body that said, this is how we're going to go on ceremonial issues. Ethical law doesn't even have to be explained. We know it's wrong to murder this and that, but ceremony has to be ruled on so it can be kept in a uniform manner.
Beverly wants to know, where can I find a bencher? I think you could probably pick one up at your local synagogue for free. Probably give them out to you.
Are you crazy? So you walk around stealing benches and sitters from synagogue?
No, just ask a Rav for a bencher. He'll probably give you one.
I mean, they'll give you one out of saying, like, I'm going to give you one so you don't steal it. But no, most people don't give away benchers.
Yeah,
or maybe
I've gotten that at bar mitzvahs, weddings. I got
bar mitzvahs is different, because they're meant to give them out, to the guests. Each bencher costs $5 or so. If you go to
you're talking about a nice one.
Well, your average NCSY bencher, let's say, so an NCSY bencher. I'm not saying like a 2-page little bencher, which you really shouldn't steal anyways, because they use those. If everyone would take one, there wouldn't be any left. So most people have them from weddings. Yes, like when you go to a wedding, they'll give you a bencher typically. That's like an easy way out to give people a parting gift. Yeah, don't jack anything from a synagogue. That's the last thing.
No. Yeah. I've many times I've asked a Rav for a bencher or a siddur, and they'll be more than willing to give you one.
I mean, whatever. Like, be a giver, don't be a taker. I'm not trying to attack you, John. I'm just trying to.
I would like to know where to find the way Orthodox Shabbos lunch is done. Kiddush. What do you mean by that? How I would like to know where to find the way.
Go to your local Orthodox synagogue this Saturday around 10 a.m. Show up. Park 5 blocks on the road. Leave your cell phone in your car. Heck, leave your keys in your car. Just don't lock your car. Walk into shul. Grab a kippah or bring your own. Sit in the male section if you're a male and the women's section if you're a woman. Stand when they stand. Sit when they sit. All synagogues are going to have Kiddush after. Kiddush Rabbah, which just means that with the cup. But Kiddush also means cholent and some kugel. Chabad typically always does this. Like if it's a Chabad, they're going to have a meal. If your synagogue has a little meal at the end, that is what Kiddush is typically understood to be. And you guys are welcome to be a part of that. Just don't be shy, okay? Because that's one thing that Jewish people do not respect, shyness. They want you to have a little chutzpah. Go there and feel at home, right? Even though there may be eyes on you, feel at home. Go up to the rabbi, say, great speech, this and that. I'm not Jewish, but I'm interested. And you guys could do it. Whether it's a conservative or an Orthodox synagogue, you could do it this Shabbat. Okay? Don't be shy. Do it. And then come back here next week and tell us about your experience. Because most people don't do it because they're shy. And it's true. Sometimes you'll be mistreated. But there's no glory without a challenge.
Do you think they're going to have food this week? I mean, are they going to, because COVID's still going on?
Oh, well, most schools are closed. Most schools are closed. Stop.
Yeah.
Okay.
But my neighborhood, the ones that are open, and they're probably going to have food, yeah.
So,
well, when I went, I've been to 2 of them in the Birmingham area, and they didn't do the hand washing like we experienced before our, conversion we did with you, because we're actually still in Fort Lauderdale.
So in Kiddush, they don't typically serve bread.
Okay.
Technically, you don't have to have bread to wash. It's either bread or a meal or a full meal. So it's considered a snack. Now, if you see bread there, it could be what's called the mazonis roll. Bread that you don't have to wash for whatever reason. Oh. So you're not sitting down. You're typically like standing there with a little thing and a little spoon and you're eating. Yeah, that's the Kiddush. Now, like if it's Chabad, then they bring out the alcohol and everyone starts getting...
That's a for bringing.
Yeah.
You're going to have a fun time. It looks like Carla has her hand raised. How you doing, Carla?
I went to a congregation right before COVID happened. And the mechitza, there was no mechitza. It was an Orthodox congregation, but it was like all the women were on one side, all of the men were on the other, and there were plants going down the center, but it wasn't like together. Is that?
So that's a Chabad practice with the plants. Was it a Chabad?
No, it was like, and it wasn't very many. It was just a couple. It was like maybe 3 over like 25 feet.
So the plants count as a mechitza. The mechitza just means separation. Now, according to halakha, you don't need a mechitza.
Oh.
A mechitza is just a custom. Now, the average person doesn't know this. Ramosha Feinstein he gave measurements for what a mechitza is. I think he said it was 5 feet at minimum. I think other people said even 3 feet. It doesn't appear in the Talmud. There's a statement in the Talmud that for Simchas Beis HaShoeva, which is the holiday of water, that they would pour water in the Mizbeach. It was such a festive holiday with dancing and stuff like that they built a platform in the courtyard in the Azara. But that's the only instance. It wasn't for prayer. It was just for that instance. And this is why in Europe, all the mechitzas, they're known as Ezras Nashim, are always on the second floor. That was the custom in almost every synagogue. It's only, I think, till they came to America that they just started putting it down the middle. But there's no halacha to have a mechitza. Now, the truth is that women never went to the synagogue. Heck, the Rambam mentions as a custom. What was customary in his time that to let your wife out twice a month was a lot. If anything, it would have resembled what Muslims do. So Muslims typically don't have a physical mechitza, but the women would pray behind and the men would pray in front, just because there's certain things that a man can recite while looking at a woman, especially what's called an erva, someone who's prohibited to him. So that would make more sense. But being that mechitza just means separation, technically there's no law requiring one.